I was sipping my morning coffee when I saw her marching up my driveway like she owned the place, which was hilarious considering I actually did own pretty much every place around here. The woman wore a bright purple parka that made her look like an angry grape, and her face was already twisted into that expression I'd come to recognize as perpetual dissatisfaction. "Excuse me," she shouted before she even reached my porch. "Excuse me, sir. I need to speak with you immediately." I set down my mug and opened the front door, letting the cold February air rush into my entryway. The snow had been falling steadily for 3 days straight here in Pine Ridge, Vermont, and the entire development looked like something out of a Christmas card. "Beautiful if you didn't have to shovel it. Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. The woman stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, breathing heavily. She had to be in her mid-40s, with that specific haircut that seemed to be a requirement for a certain type of personality. "You know the one. Short, angular, with blonde highlights that screamed, 'I'd like to speak to the manager.' I'm Barbara Patterson, president of the Pine Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association," she announced like I should be impressed, "and we have a serious problem." "Okay," I said slowly. "What's the problem?" "The snow." She gestured wildly at the white-covered landscape around us. "You haven't cleared the snow from any of the vacant lots in the development. It's a violation of our HOA bylaws, and frankly, it's making the entire neighborhood look neglected." I blinked at her. "I'm sorry, what?" "The vacant lots," Barbara repeated, enunciating each word like I was stupid. "Lots 7 through 18. They're all covered in snow, and according to our bylaws, all property owners must maintain their lots in a presentable condition year-round. That includes snow removal." I leaned against my doorframe, suddenly very interested in where this conversation was going. "And you think I'm responsible for those lots?" "Of course you are." Barbara's voice rose higher. "You're the developer, aren't you, Kevin Isaacs? You built this entire development, so until those lots are sold, you're responsible for their maintenance." This was going to be good. I could already tell. "Miss Patterson," I said carefully, "can I ask you something? Have you actually looked at the property records for those lots?" Her face flushed slightly. "I don't need to look at property records. Everyone knows you developed this area. It's common sense that you'd still own the unsold lots." "Everyone knows," I repeated. "That's interesting, because I do own those lots. But I also own a few other lots you might not be aware of." Barbara crossed her arms. "What's your point?" "My point is that I own lots 7 through 18, like you said. But I also own lots 1 through 6, 19 through 32, and 35 through 40. In fact, I own every single lot in the Pine Ridge Meadows development except for 3. The color drained from her face. "That's impossible." "It's not only possible, it's documented with the county clerk's office," I said. "Would you like to know which 3 lots I don't own?" She didn't respond, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. "I don't own lot 33, which belongs to the Hendersons. Nice couple, never had a problem with them. I don't own lot 34, which belongs to the Chengs, also lovely people. And I don't own lot 41. I paused for effect. "Lot 41 belongs to you, Miss Patterson." Barbara's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "But the HOA." "The HOA has exactly 3 members," I continued. "You, the Hendersons, and the Chengs. And from what I understand, you appointed yourself president without actually holding an election. The Hendersons mentioned it to me last summer when you tried to fine them for having their trash cans visible from the street." "This is absurd," Barbara sputtered. "You can't own an entire development and just leave it empty." "I can do whatever I want with my property," I said pleasantly. "Just like you can do whatever you want with yours. But here's the thing, Miss Patterson. If you ever come onto my property again making demands, I'll have you charged with trespassing." Have a nice day." I closed the door before she could respond, then watched through my window as she stormed back down the driveway, nearly slipping on a patch of ice in her fury. My phone rang about 20 minutes later. It was David Henderson from Lot 33. "Kevin, I'm so sorry," David said immediately. "Barbara just came by our house ranting about you. She's saying she's going to force you to sell the lots or something. I tried to tell her she can't do that, but she's not listening." I sighed. "Don't worry about it, David. She's not the first difficult person I've dealt with, and she won't be the last. The thing is, she's drafting up some kind of emergency HOA meeting," David continued. "She wants to implement new bylaws that would fine you for each day the lots aren't maintained. I got the email a few minutes ago." "She can't fine me," I said. "I'm not part of the HOA." That's what I told her. "But she says that anyone who owns property in Pine Ridge Meadows is automatically part of the HOA, whether they sign the agreement or not." That got my attention. "David, did you sign an HOA agreement when you bought your lot?" "Yeah, it was part of the closing documents. Pretty standard stuff about keeping the property maintained, no loud parties, that kind of thing." "And you're okay with that agreement?" "Sure, it's reasonable. We knew what we were getting into." "Okay, good. Listen, don't worry about Barbara. Let me know when she schedules this meeting. I might actually attend." After I hung up with David, I went to my home office and pulled out the filing cabinet where I kept all the property documents for Pine Ridge Meadows. The development had been my passion project, a way to create a small, sustainable community in the Vermont countryside that would appeal to people looking for a quieter life, without being completely isolated. I'd bought the land 5 years ago, a beautiful 100-acre parcel just outside of Rutland. The location was perfect, close enough to town for convenience, but far enough out to feel like you were really living in nature. I divided it into 41 lots of varying sizes, built the roads, installed utilities, and constructed 3 model homes to showcase what the development could be. Then, the economy had shifted. The market for new homes had cooled, and people weren't as eager to invest in new developments, especially ones that were only partially built. I'd sold exactly 3 lots in 3 years, one to the Hendersons, one to the Changs, and unfortunately, one to Barbara Patterson. But here was the thing. I'd never created an HOA. I'd never filed HOA documents with the county, never established bylaws, never set up a management structure. The documents that David and the other homeowners had signed were basic property covenants, standard stuff that any developer would include. Keep your property reasonably maintained. Don't do anything that would decrease property values. Don't run a commercial business without approval. Basic common sense rules. Barbara, however, had apparently decided to take those basic covenants and transform them into a full-fledged HOA with herself as the supreme ruler. I pulled up the county records on my computer and did some searching. Sure enough, 6 months ago, Barbara had filed articles of incorporation for the Pine Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association with herself listed as president, secretary, and treasurer. The problem was that you couldn't just create an HOA without the consent of the property owners. And Barbara definitely didn't have my consent, considering I owned 93% of the property in the development. I spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls. First to my attorney, Marcus Webb, who specialized in property law. He laughed when I explained the situation. "She really filed incorporation documents without getting consent from the majority property owner?" Marcus asked, still chuckling. "That's bold, stupid but bold." "Can she enforce any of the bylaws she's creating?" I asked. "Against you?" "Absolutely not. You never agreed to join an HOA, and she can't force you to." Against the Hendersons and the Changs, maybe, if their purchase agreements included language about being subject to HOA rules. But even then, she'd have to prove that the HOA was legally established, which it wasn't. So what do I do? Well, you could file a complaint to have the HOA dissolved, or you could just ignore her. She has no legal authority over you or your property. If she tries to place a lien or fine you, we'll fight it and win. What about this meeting she's planning? Marcus paused. Actually, you should go to that. As the majority property owner, you technically have the right to attend any meeting regarding the development. And if she's planning to vote on bylaws that would affect your property, you have the right to vote. In fact, since you own 93% of the property, you essentially have 93% of the vote. I liked where this was going. Can you draft a document for me? Something that explains my ownership stake and my voting rights. I'll have it ready by tomorrow morning. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for that Friday evening at 7 o'clock, to be held at Barbara's house on Lot 41. I received the email notification along with the Hendersons and the Changs, though Barbara had clearly sent it grudgingly, probably because she couldn't figure out a way to exclude me. The proposed agenda included 3 items: establishing mandatory snow removal requirements for all lots, implementing a fine structure for non-compliance, and discussing options for acquiring neglected properties. That last one was particularly interesting. I forwarded the email to Marcus, who called me back within 10 minutes. "Kevin, that last item is concerning," he said. "She might be trying to set up a mechanism to force you to sell your lots to the HOA. Can she do that?" "No, but that doesn't mean she won't try." Some HOAs have provisions that allow them to acquire properties that have been abandoned or are in severe violation of bylaws. Obviously, that doesn't apply here since your lots aren't abandoned and you're not in violation of anything. But if she convinces the Hendersons and the Changs to vote in favor of these measures, she might try to use them against you anyway. And then I'd have to take her to court to fight it. Exactly, which would be expensive and time-consuming, even though you'd eventually win. So I need to shut this down before it gets to that point. That's what I'd recommend. Friday evening arrived with more snow. I bundled up in my warmest jacket and walked the quarter-mile to Barbara's house, enjoying the quiet crunch of my boots on the fresh powder. The sky was clear for the first time in days, and stars were beginning to appear in the deepening twilight. Barbara's house was one of the models I'd built. A nice 3-bedroom craftsman with a stone facade and a wraparound porch. Lights blazed from every window, and I could see figures moving around inside. I knocked on the door, and Barbara answered almost immediately. Her expression went from professional smile to hostile glare in about half a second. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Attending the HOA meeting," I said, holding up my phone with the email she'd sent. "It says 7 o'clock, right? This meeting is for HOA members only." "I am an HOA member, or at least that's what you've been claiming. Can't have it both ways, Barbara." She wanted to slam the door in my face. I could see it in her eyes. But David Henderson appeared behind her, smiling apologetically. "Kevin, come on in. It's freezing out there." David ushered me inside before Barbara could protest further. The living room was set up like a conference room, with chairs arranged in a circle and a small table in the center holding a laptop and a stack of papers. Besides Barbara, David, and myself, there was David's wife, Michelle, and Lisa and Tom Cheng from Lot 34. "I'm glad you're here, Kevin," Lisa Cheng said warmly. She was a retired teacher, one of those genuinely kind people who seemed to radiate positivity. "Maybe you can help us understand what's going on with all these new rules Barbara wants to implement." "That's exactly why I'm here," I said, taking a seat between David and Tom. Barbara remained standing, clutching a folder to her chest like a shield. Before we begin, I need to state for the record that Kevin Isaacs's presence here is under protest. As the developer and a commercial property owner, he should not have voting rights in this HOA. Actually, I said, pulling out the document Marcus had prepared, I should have 93% of the voting rights in this HOA, assuming the HOA is even legally valid, which we can discuss later. But since I own 38 of the 41 lots in Pine Ridge Meadows, any votes taken here tonight need to reflect that ownership stake. I handed copies of the document to everyone in the room. It was beautifully prepared, with an official header from Marcus's law firm and a detailed breakdown of every property ownership record in the development. Barbara's face went through several shades of red and purple. That's ridiculous. You can't just come in here and claim to have 93% of the vote. It's not a claim, it's a fact, I said calmly. Every lot I own is listed there, along with the deed numbers and county filing information. If you'd like to verify it, you're welcome to check with the Rutland County Clerk's office. Tom Cheng was studying the document carefully. He was a retired accountant, and I could see him doing the math in his head. This appears to be accurate, he said finally. Kevin does own the vast majority of the development. But that means... Michelle Henderson trailed off, looking at Barbara. That means that any bylaws or rules this HOA votes on need Kevin's approval, David finished, since he has the majority vote. This is absurd. Barbara's voice was shrill now. He's trying to take over the HOA. I'm not trying to take over anything, I said. In fact, I'd like to propose a different solution entirely. But first, let's address the items on your agenda, Barbara. You wanted to discuss mandatory snow removal for all lots. Yes, Barbara said stiffly. It's making the development look terrible. Why? I asked. Who's looking at it? The three of you live here, and you can see your own properties and maybe one or two of the vacant lots from your houses. But most of the development is set back from the road. The only way to see most of those lots is to actually drive into the development, which no one does except us. That's not the point, Barbara snapped. It's about maintaining standards. Standards for who? I pressed. There's nobody here. And frankly, I like the way the snow looks. It's natural, it's beautiful, and it provides insulation for the native plants that are growing on those lots. Native plants, Barbara repeated sarcastically. You mean weeds? I mean wildflowers, grasses, and shrubs that provide habitat for local wildlife, I corrected. I've been managing those lots as natural meadows, which is better for the environment than keeping them mowed or cleared. Lisa Cheng perked up at this. Really? I've noticed we get a lot of birds in the area. Is that because of the meadows? Partially, yes. Meadow habitat is increasingly rare in Vermont, and a lot of species depend on it. I've documented at least 15 species of birds using the vacant lots, including several that are of conservation concern. That's wonderful, Lisa said. Tom and I moved here specifically because we wanted to be closer to nature. Barbara could see the conversation slipping away from her. That's all very nice, but it doesn't change the fact that unmaintained lots decrease property values. Do they? I pulled out my phone and brought up a real estate website. Let's look at the actual data. Your house, Barbara, is currently valued at approximately $420,000 according to the county assessment. The Hendersons' home is valued at $435,000, and the Cheng's home is at $440,000. Those are all well above the original purchase prices, and the values have increased steadily year over year. That's because of the overall market, Barbara protested. Partially, I agreed. But let's compare with other developments in the area. Stone Creek Estates, which is fully built out with all lots developed, and a very active HOA, has an average property value of $410,000. Mountain View Commons, similar situation, averages $400,000. So actually, the properties in Pine Ridge Meadows are valued higher than comparable properties in fully developed subdivisions. Tom was nodding along. That makes sense. A lot of people are willing to pay a premium for privacy and natural space. It's one of the reasons we chose this development. But, Barbara was floundering now. The bylaws clearly state that all properties must be maintained. The covenants state that properties must be reasonably maintained, I corrected. And reasonable maintenance for a vacant lot is very different from reasonable maintenance for an occupied home. I mow the roadside edges of all my lots twice a year to keep sight lines clear for safety. I ensure that no hazardous materials or structures are present. That's reasonable maintenance for undeveloped land. I disagree, Barbara said flatly, and as HOA president, I have the authority to determine what constitutes reasonable maintenance. Actually, you don't, I said. Even if this HOA were legally valid, which I'm not convinced it is, the president doesn't have unilateral authority to redefine covenant terms. That would require a vote of the membership. And as we've established, I hold the majority vote. Barbara slammed her folder down on the table. This is exactly the kind of attitude that makes HOAs necessary. You developers think you can do whatever you want with no regard for the community. Barbara, David said gently, Kevin's been nothing but reasonable since we moved in. When we had that issue with our well pump, he came over and helped us troubleshoot it for free. When the Cheng's driveway started washing out, he brought over a load of gravel from his own stockpile. That's basic human decency, Barbara snapped. It doesn't give him the right to let the entire development go to seed. I think that's a bit dramatic, Michelle said. Honestly, Barbara, I don't understand why you're so upset about this. The snow on the vacant lots doesn't affect you. It affects all of us. Property values, marketability, community standards. Barbara, I interrupted. Can I ask you something? And I want you to be honest. Why did you really buy a property here? She blinked at me. What kind of question is that? A genuine one. Most people who buy in Pine Ridge Meadows are looking for peace, quiet, and natural beauty. They want space and privacy. But you seem to want something different. You want a fully developed neighborhood with strict rules and active governance. So why did you choose to buy here instead of in one of the more established developments? For a moment, I thought she might actually answer honestly. Her expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across her face before the anger snapped back into place. I don't have to explain myself to you, she said. Now, are we going to have this meeting or not? We're having it right now, I said. So let's vote on your proposed items. First item, mandatory snow removal for all lots. All in favor. Barbara raised her hand. Nobody else did. All opposed. I raised my hand along with David, Michelle, Lisa, and Tom. Motion fails, I said. Second item, implementing a fine structure for non-compliance. All in favor. Again, only Barbara raised her hand. Motion fails. Third item, discussing options for acquiring neglected properties. I'm going to be blunt, Barbara. If you're trying to set up a mechanism to force me to sell my property, it's not going to work. It's illegal, it's unethical, and I will fight it in court. So let's save everyone the time and money and just vote this down now. All in favor. Barbara's hand shot up, but she was alone. Motion fails. Is there any other business? Yes, Barbara said venomously. I move that we remove Kevin Isaacs from the HOA membership on the grounds that he's a commercial developer, not a resident. That's not how HOAs work, Tom said, sounding tired. If his lots are part of the development, he's part of the HOA, assuming the HOA is valid. You can't just kick people out because you don't like them. Then I move that we dissolve the HOA entirely and reform it with membership limited to occupied residences. Now that, I said, is something I can support. All in favor of dissolving the current HOA. Every hand in the room went up, including Barbara's, though she looked confused about what she'd just voted for. Excellent, I said. The Pine Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association is hereby dissolved by unanimous vote. Barbara, you'll need to file dissolution paperwork with the state. My attorney can provide you with the forms if you need them. Wait, Barbara said. That's not what I meant. It's what you moved for, David pointed out. And we all voted in favor. The HOA is dissolved. Barbara looked around the room, panic replacing the anger on her face. But we need an HOA. Who's going to enforce the rules? Who's going to maintain standards? We're all adults, Lisa said kindly. I think we can maintain our own properties without needing an HOA to tell us how to do it. And honestly, Barbara, I think this will be better for everyone. No fees, no meetings, no conflicts, just neighbors being neighborly. But no, Barbara seemed to be having trouble processing what had just happened. This isn't, you can't. Meeting adjourned, I said, standing up. Thank you all for your time. David, Michelle, Lisa, Tom, it's always good to see you. Barbara, you have a good evening. I let myself out while Barbara was still sputtering. The cold night air felt refreshing after the tension in that living room. I was halfway home when I heard someone calling my name. It was David, jogging to catch up with me. Kevin, wait up. I stopped and turned. What's up? I just wanted to apologize, David said, breathing hard. Michelle and I should have shut Barbara down months ago when she started this HOA thing. We just didn't think it would become such a big deal. It's not your fault, I said. Some people need to feel like they have control over their environment. Barbara's one of them. Still, it's been uncomfortable. She's constantly coming by our house complaining about something. Last week it was because our recycling bin was visible from the road. The week before that, she said our Christmas lights were too bright. Has she been bothering the Chengs too? Oh yeah, Lisa told me Barbara tried to fine them $50 because their newspaper wasn't picked up by noon one day. A newspaper. Tom told her where she could put her fine, which is probably why she's been even more aggressive about this snow removal thing. She wanted to find something to use against you. Well, she failed, I said. And now there's no HOA, so she doesn't have any authority at all. David grinned. The look on her face when she realized what she'd voted for was priceless. I thought Michelle was going to burst out laughing. Just to be clear, I said seriously, I'm not trying to cause problems for anyone. If you, Michelle, the Chengs, or even Barbara have legitimate concerns about something I'm doing with my properties, I'm happy to discuss it. I want this to be a good place to live. We know that, Kevin. You've been a great neighbor. And honestly, we love having all this open space around us. It's like having a 100-acre backyard. That's the idea, I said. I built this development because I wanted to preserve as much of the natural character of the land as possible. If I ever do sell the remaining lots, it'll be to people who appreciate that vision. Well, if Barbara tries to start any more trouble, let us know. We've got your back. I thanked David and continued home, feeling pretty good about how the evening had turned out. The HOA was dissolved. Barbara's plans had been thoroughly derailed, and I'd made it clear that I wasn't going to be pushed around. But I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. The following Monday morning, I woke up to find 3 certified letters in my mailbox. The first was from the Pine Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association, claiming that the Friday meeting had been illegitimate because I hadn't been properly notified in advance. The second was a bill for $15,000 in snow removal fees for the 38 lots I owned. The third was a notice of lien against all of my properties in the development. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the letters in disbelief. Barbara had completely ignored the dissolution vote and was doubling down on her fake authority. I called Marcus immediately. She did what? Marcus sounded as incredulous as I felt. She's claiming the meeting was illegitimate and that the HOA is still active, and she's trying to place a lien on my properties. Kevin, she can't do that. The HOA was dissolved by vote. Even if the vote had been invalid, which it wasn't, she doesn't have the authority to unilaterally place liens. You need to file those liens in court and she'd lose immediately because she has no legal standing. So, what do I do? First, don't panic. These letters are meaningless. She's just trying to intimidate you. Second, I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter. If she continues this harassment, we can pursue legal action against her for abuse of process. I don't want to sue her, I said. I just want her to leave me alone. Then the cease and desist should do the trick. Most people back off once they realize they could face legal consequences. Marcus sent the cease and desist letter that afternoon via certified mail and email. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, politely but firmly explaining all the ways Barbara was breaking the law and all the consequences she could face if she continued. For 3 days, I heard nothing. I started to relax, thinking that maybe the letter had worked. Then on Thursday afternoon, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "Kevin Isaacs," the deputy asked. "That's me. I need to serve you with this complaint." He handed me a thick envelope. "You've been sued by the Pine Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association for violation of community covenants, failure to maintain properties, and willful disregard of HOA authority. You have 30 days to respond." I stood there holding the envelope, completely stunned. Barbara had actually sued me. I called Marcus again. "She's really committed to this insanity," Marcus said after I'd explained about the lawsuit. "Okay, don't worry. This is actually good news." "How is being sued good news?" "Because now we can get everything resolved in court once and for all. We'll file a motion to dismiss based on lack of standing, and we'll counterclaim for harassment and abuse of process. The judge will see through this immediately." "How long will it take?" "Couple of months, probably. These things move slowly." "But Kevin, I need you to document everything from now on. Every interaction with Barbara, every letter, every email. If she shows up at your property, document it. If she contacts the Hendersons or Chengs about you, have them document it. We're building a case here." Over the next few weeks, Barbara's behavior escalated to levels I hadn't thought possible. She started driving through the development multiple times a day, stopping to take photos of my vacant lots. She sent daily emails to me, the Hendersons and the Chengs, complaining about everything from uncontrolled vegetation to inadequate fence maintenance, even though there were no fences. She filed complaints with the town zoning board, claiming I was running an illegal business. When the zoning officer came out to investigate and found nothing wrong, she filed a complaint against him with the town manager. She contacted the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, claiming I was creating wetland violations. They sent an inspector who confirmed that no violations existed and that my meadow management was actually beneficial for the environment. She even called the local newspaper, trying to get them to run a story about developer negligence in Pine Ridge Meadows. The reporter called me for comment, and after I explained the situation, she decided there was no story there. But the worst incident came in mid-March. I was in town running errands when I got a frantic call from David Henderson. "Kevin, you need to get back here right now. David said. "Barbara's on your property with a snowplow and she's plowing all the vacant lots." "She's what?" "She hired a commercial snow removal company. They're plowing every lot you own. Kevin, they're destroying the meadows. They're running over everything, tearing up vegetation. There's mud and snow flying everywhere. It's a disaster. I broke at least 3 traffic laws getting back to Pine Ridge Meadows. When I arrived, I found exactly what David had described. A massive commercial snowplow truck was churning through Lot 12, its blades scraping down to bare earth and ripping up all the native plants I'd been cultivating for years. Barbara stood on the side of the road, directing the operator like a general commanding troops. I parked my truck blocking the entrance to the lot and jumped out. "Stop! Stop right now!" The plow operator looked confused but kept going. Barbara marched over to me, triumphant. "Finally taking care of your responsibilities on your behalf," she announced. "Since you refuse to clear the snow, the HOA is doing it for you. We'll bill you for the service, of course." "You're trespassing," I said, pulling out my phone. "And you're destroying private property. Get off my land right now." "I'm enforcing HOA bylaws," Barbara said smugly. "You should thank me." "There is no HOA," I shouted. "We dissolved it, and even if there was, you don't have the right to enter private property without permission. The bylaws give the HOA the right to perform necessary maintenance if an owner refuses to do so." "Barbara, I'm calling the police right now. If that plow isn't off my property in the next 60 seconds, I'm pressing charges for criminal trespassing and vandalism." "You can't do that. Watch me." I dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "I have trespassers on my property who are refusing to leave and are actively destroying my land. I need an officer at Pine Ridge Meadows Development, Lot 12, immediately. Are you or anyone else in immediate danger?" "No, but they're operating heavy equipment on my property without permission." "Officers are on the way. Please stay on the line." Barbara's confidence faltered for the first time. "You're overreacting. This is a civil matter. The police won't do anything." "We'll see about that." The snow plow operator had stopped now, clearly realizing something was wrong. He climbed down from the cab and walked over to us. "Madam, is there a problem?" he asked Barbara. "No problem," Barbara said quickly. "Keep going." "Actually, there's a big problem," I said. "I'm Kevin Isaacs, and I own this property. I never authorized any snow removal, and I'm asking you to leave immediately." The operator looked between us, clearly trying to figure out who to believe. The lady showed me the work order, said she was with the HOA. "The HOA doesn't exist, and even if it did, she doesn't have authority to enter my property without my permission. Look, I don't blame you. You were just doing the job you were hired for, but I need you to leave now before the police arrive." "Police?" The operator went pale. "Lady, you told me this was all authorized." "It is authorized," Barbara insisted. "The HOA has the right to." "I don't want any part of this," the operator said, backing toward his truck. "I'm out of here." He climbed back into the cab and started backing the plow toward the road. Barbara tried to block him, but he just went around her, clearly wanting to get away from the situation as fast as possible. 2 police cruisers pulled into the development just as the plow truck was leaving. A state trooper and a local officer got out and walked over to where I was standing with Barbara and David, who had come over when he heard the commotion. "Someone want to explain what's going on here?" the trooper asked. I went first, calmly laying out the situation. "I own the property. Barbara was the president of a dissolved HOA who was trying to exercise authority she didn't have, and she'd hired a contractor to enter my property without permission." Barbara interrupted multiple times, insisting she had the right to enforce HOA bylaws. The officers let her talk, then asked to see documentation. I pulled up the property records on my phone, showing my ownership of Lot 12. Barbara produced a stack of papers that included her self-created HOA bylaws, the lawsuit she'd filed, and the bogus bills she'd sent me. The trooper studied everything carefully, then looked at Barbara. "Madam, do you have written permission from Mr. Isaacs to enter this property?" "I don't need permission. The HOA bylaws." "Madam, HOA bylaws don't override property rights. If he owns the property and didn't give you permission to enter, you're trespassing." "But I'm the HOA president." "That doesn't matter," the local officer said. "You can't just go onto someone else's property because you think you have authority. That's not how it works." "This is ridiculous," Barbara sputtered. "He's the one who's breaking the rules." "What rules?" the trooper asked. "He can do whatever he wants with his own property as long as he's not breaking any laws. Is he breaking any laws? He's violating HOA covenants." "That's a civil matter, not a criminal one, but trespassing is a criminal matter." The trooper turned to me. "Mr. Isaacs, do you want to press charges?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say yes, just to make a point. But I could see that Barbara was finally starting to understand the seriousness of the situation. She looked frightened now, the confidence completely gone. "Not right now," I said, "but I want it documented. If Miss Patterson enters any of my properties again without permission, I will press charges." "Fair enough." The trooper made some notes. "Miss Patterson, I'm giving you an official warning. You are not to enter Mr. Isaacs's properties without his explicit written permission. If he calls us again about you trespassing, you will be arrested. Do you understand?" Barbara nodded mutely. "I need to hear you say it." "I understand," Barbara whispered. "Good. Now, I suggest you go home and maybe consult with an attorney about this HOA situation, because from what I can see, you don't have the authority you think you have." After the police left, I walked Lot 12 to assess the damage. It was bad. The plow had torn up about a third of the lot, destroying years of careful meadow management. Native grasses, wildflowers, and shrubs had been ripped out of the ground and scattered across churned-up mud. David stood beside me, shaking his head. "Kevin, I'm so sorry. If I'd noticed sooner." "It's not your fault," I said. "You called me as soon as you saw what was happening." "What are you going to do?" "Document everything, add it to the lawsuit, and probably plant some temporary cover crops to prevent erosion until I can restore the native vegetation." "Will that cost a lot?" "A few $1,000s, probably. Maybe more depending on how much damage there is under all this snow." "Barbara's responsible for that, right? She has to pay for it." "In theory, yes. But first I have to win the lawsuit, then I have to collect. She might not have the money." "She drives a brand new Mercedes," David said. "She has money." Over the next few days, I documented the damage extensively. I took photos, measurements, and notes. I hired an environmental consultant to assess the destruction and prepare a restoration plan. The consultant estimated it would cost about $8,000 to restore the lot to its previous condition. Marcus added all of it to our counterclaim against Barbara, which now included trespassing, vandalism, harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The total damages we were seeking had grown to over $50,000. "We probably won't get all of that," Marcus admitted, "but it sends a message that her behavior has consequences." The lawsuit finally went to court in late May. By then, the snow had melted and the full extent of the damage to Lot 12 was visible. The churned-up earth had turned into a muddy wasteland, and erosion had already started creating gullies that ran toward the wetland at the back of the property. The day of the hearing, I arrived at the Rutland County Courthouse with Marcus, feeling nervous despite knowing we had a strong case. We met the Hendersons and Chengs in the hallway outside the courtroom. They'd both filed affidavits supporting my side of the story. Barbara showed up 15 minutes late with an attorney I didn't recognize, a nervous-looking young man who couldn't have been more than a couple years out of law school. He kept trying to get Barbara to lower her voice as she ranted about developer tyranny and community standards. Judge Patricia Yamamoto called the case, and we all took our seats. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for not tolerating foolishness in her courtroom. "All right," Judge Yamamoto said, looking over the case file. "Miss Patterson, you're the plaintiff in the original complaint, so let's start with you. Explain to me why you're suing Mr. Isaacs." Barbara's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, my client is the president of the Pine Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association. Mr. Isaacs owns multiple properties within the development and has consistently refused to maintain those properties according to HOA bylaws. The HOA is seeking an order compelling him to comply with community standards and to pay accumulated fines for non-compliance." "And what's your response, Mr. Webb?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the Pine Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association is not a legitimate legal entity. It was created without the consent of the majority property owner, namely my client, who owns 93% of the development. Furthermore, the HOA was formally dissolved by vote of all members in February. Ms. Patterson is attempting to enforce bylaws that have no legal authority." "Miss Patterson," the judge said, "is it true that Mr. Isaacs owns 93% of the development?" "Yes, but—" "And when you created the HOA, did you obtain his consent?" "Well, the covenants." "Yes or no, Miss Patterson?" "No, but he should have been included automatically because he owns property there." Judge Yamamoto made a note. "You can't force someone to join an HOA without their consent, Miss Patterson, especially someone who owns the vast majority of the property. And you say the HOA was dissolved." "They claim it was dissolved," Barbara's attorney said, "but my client contends that meeting was improper because—" "Do you have evidence that the meeting was improper?" the judge interrupted. "Mr. Isaacs wasn't given proper advance notice." "Your Honor," Marcus said, "Miss Patterson herself sent the meeting notice to Mr. Isaacs via email 5 days before the meeting. We have the email and Miss Patterson's attorney submitted it as evidence in their own filing. Miss Patterson cannot claim she didn't properly notify someone when she herself sent the notice." Judge Yamamoto looked at Barbara's attorney. "Is that accurate?" The young attorney shuffled through his papers, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "It appears that may be the case, Your Honor. So the meeting was properly noticed, all members attended, and they voted to dissolve the HOA." "Yes, Your Honor, but then the HOA is dissolved. Miss Patterson, you have no standing to bring this lawsuit. The complaint is dismissed." Judge Yamamoto made another note. "Now let's talk about the counterclaim." Mr. Webb, Marcus stood again. "Your Honor, after the HOA was dissolved, Miss Patterson engaged in a months-long campaign of harassment against my client. She filed false reports with multiple government agencies. She attempted to place illegal liens on his property. And most seriously, she hired a contractor to enter his property without permission and destroy approximately 1/3 of an acre of established native meadow habitat. We have documentation of all of this, including police reports from the trespassing incident." "Miss Patterson, did you hire someone to plow Mr. Isaacs's property without his permission?" Barbara stood up, ignoring her attorney's attempts to stop her. "He refused to clear the snow. It was a violation of community standards. As HOA president, I had the authority." "You didn't have any authority," Judge Yamamoto said sharply. "The HOA was dissolved, And even if it hadn't been, HOA authority doesn't extend to entering private property without permission. You committed criminal trespassing, Miss Patterson. But Sit down, Miss Patterson. The judge waited until Barbara reluctantly took her seat. Mr. Webb, you're seeking damages of $52,000. Yes, Your Honor. $8,000 for property restoration, $4,000 for the environmental consultant and legal fees related to responding to Miss Patterson's false complaints, and $40,000 in punitive damages for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. That seems high. Your Honor, my client has been dealing with Miss Patterson's harassment for months. She's filed false liens, false government complaints, and false accusations. She's sent dozens of threatening emails and letters. She's interfered with his peaceful enjoyment of his property. And when he tried to resolve things peacefully, she escalated to the point of committing criminal acts. We believe significant punitive damages are appropriate to ensure this behavior stops. Judge Yamamoto looked at Barbara's attorney. What's your defense? Your Honor, my client believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. She didn't intend to cause harm. Intent doesn't matter in trespassing cases, the judge said. She either had permission or she didn't. Did she? No, Your Honor. Then she's liable. Judge Yamamoto reviewed the file for another moment. Here's my ruling. The original complaint is dismissed with prejudice. Miss Patterson, you are permanently enjoined from claiming any HOA authority over Mr. Isaacs or his properties. You are ordered to pay restitution of $12,000 for property restoration and related expenses. I'm declining to award the full punitive damages, but I am adding an additional $5,000 in sanctions for abuse of process. Total judgment is $17,000, payable within 90 days. Barbara gasped. I don't have $17,000. Then you'll need to figure out how to get it, Miss Patterson. You caused this situation through your own actions. And let me be very clear. If I hear that you've continued to harass Mr. Isaacs in any way, I will hold you in contempt and you will face additional penalties, possibly including jail time. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Barbara whispered. One more thing, the judge said. I'm forwarding the police reports from the trespassing incident to the county attorney's office. They'll decide whether to pursue criminal charges separately from this civil matter. Court is adjourned. We all stood as the judge left. Barbara sat frozen in her seat, looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Her attorney was packing up his briefcase quickly, clearly eager to be done with the case. Outside the courtroom, the Hendersons and Chengs congratulated me. Lisa Cheng gave me a hug. I'm so glad that's over, she said. Barbara made everyone miserable. Do you think she'll actually pay? Tom asked. She'll pay, Marcus said. If she doesn't, we can put a lien on her house. That's a legitimate lien, unlike the fake one she tried to file. We all went out to lunch to celebrate, and it felt good to finally put the whole mess behind me. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I was working in my garden when I saw a sheriff's vehicle pull up to Barbara's house. 2 deputies got out and went to her door. There was a conversation I couldn't hear from my distance. Then Barbara was led out in handcuffs. I called David. Do you see what's happening at Barbara's? Yeah, we're watching from our window. What do you think is going on? I have no idea. I found out later that afternoon when a detective from the county attorney's office called me. Mr. Isaacs, this is Detective Sarah Chen. I'm calling about Barbara Patterson. I saw her being arrested this morning. What happened? We've been investigating Miss Patterson following the judge's referral from your civil case. In the course of that investigation, we discovered some concerning financial irregularities. What kind of irregularities? It appears that Miss Patterson created a bank account for the Pine Ridge Meadows HOA and deposited several $1,000s into it, claiming they were HOA fees from residents. She then used that money for personal expenses. But there were no HOA fees, I said. The HOA was never legally established. Exactly. Which means she was collecting money under false pretenses. That's fraud. We've also discovered that she filed false liens against your properties with the county clerk, which is also a crime. She's being charged with multiple counts of fraud, filing false documents, and criminal trespassing. Who did she collect money from? The Hendersons and the Changs both paid what they thought were HOA fees. They didn't realize they weren't legally obligated to pay them. I felt sick. How much did she take? About $6,000 total over the past year. We're working with the victims to help them recover their money. After I hung up with Detective Chen, I immediately called David and Lisa to check on them. They were both shocked to learn that the HOA fees they'd been paying had gone into Barbara's personal account. She told us it was for road maintenance and common area upkeep, David said. We paid $100 a month. I thought it seemed reasonable. There are no common areas, I said. And I maintain the roads because they're on my property. You shouldn't have been charged anything. Can we get our money back? The detective said they're working on it. And you might be able to file claims in the civil case too. I'll have Marcus look into it. Over the next few months, more details emerged about Barbara's scheme. She'd been running the fake HOA like her personal piggy bank, using the money to pay for her car payments, her groceries, even a vacation to Florida. She'd kept meticulous records of all the fees she'd collected, which made it easy for prosecutors to build their case. She'd also been forging documents. The liens she'd filed against my properties included forged signatures that she'd claimed were from the HOA board, which didn't exist. She'd created fake meeting minutes and fake financial reports to make everything look legitimate. Barbara eventually pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was ordered to pay full restitution to the Hendersons and Changs, plus additional fines and court costs. She received 2 years of probation and was required to perform 200 hours of community service. She also had to pay me the $17,000 from the civil judgment. It took her several months, and she ended up having to sell her Mercedes and take out a personal loan, but she paid it all. The day I received the final payment, I used part of the money to hire a restoration company to fix Lot 12. They brought in native plants, repaired the erosion damage, and left the lot looking better than it had before Barbara's snow plow rampage. The Hendersons and Changs got their money back too, along with interest and damages. They both told me they'd learned their lesson about paying fees without verifying they were actually legitimate. As for Barbara, she ended up moving away from Pine Ridge Meadows about 6 months after her conviction. She sold her house at a loss and disappeared. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to New Hampshire to live with her sister. With Barbara gone, peace finally returned to the development. The Hendersons and Changs became good friends of mine, and we'd often have dinner together or help each other with projects around our properties. I continued managing my vacant lots as natural meadows, and they thrived. The native plants came back stronger than ever, and I documented over 30 species of birds using the habitat, including several rare species that attracted some attention from local conservation groups. A Vermont Land Trust representative even contacted me about potentially placing a conservation easement on some of the lots to preserve them permanently as wildlife habitat. It was an interesting idea that I was seriously considering. As for selling the lots, I was in no hurry. The real estate market was slowly improving, but I'd learned that the right buyers were worth waiting for. I wanted people who would appreciate the natural beauty of the area and respect the vision I had for the development. In the meantime, I was content to maintain the meadows, watch the wildlife, and enjoy the peace of living in one of the most beautiful places in Vermont. One evening in early autumn, almost a year after the whole HOA disaster had started, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when David and Michelle walked over with a bottle of wine. "We wanted to thank you," Michelle said, "for everything you did to stop Barbara. If you hadn't stood up to her, who knows how far she would have gone." "I was just protecting my property," I said. "It was more than that," David said. "You protected all of us. You could have just sold your lots and moved on, let Barbara have her little kingdom. But you stayed and fought because it was the right thing to do." We opened the wine and sat on the porch, talking and laughing as the sky turned from orange to pink to deep purple. The meadows around us rustled in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. This was what I'd wanted when I developed Pine Ridge Meadows. Not strict rules and perfect lawns, but a community of people who appreciated nature and respected each other. It had taken a while to get here, and the journey had been more difficult than I'd expected, but sitting there with my friends, watching the stars come out over the Vermont countryside, I knew it had been worth it. The following spring, I sold 3 lots to a young couple from Boston who were looking to build their dream home in the country. They loved the natural meadows and actually asked if they could help maintain them. I sold another 2 lots to a retired professor who wanted to establish a native plant garden. Each sale was carefully considered. I made sure every buyer understood and appreciated the vision for Pine Ridge Meadows. No HOA, no strict rules, just a shared commitment to living lightly on the land and being good neighbors. The development never became what I'd originally envisioned, a fully built-out subdivision of 41 homes. But it became something better, a small community of people who chose to live there because they valued open space, natural beauty, and freedom from the kind of petty tyranny that Barbara had tried to impose. I kept most of the lots as meadows, managing them for wildlife and native plants. They became a little oasis of biodiversity in an increasingly developed landscape, and I took pride in knowing that I was preserving something valuable. As for HOAs, I learned my lesson. Every property covenant I drafted after that included explicit language making it clear that no homeowners association would ever be established without the written consent of all property owners. I wasn't going to let another Barbara Patterson happen. Years later, when people ask me about the incident, I tell them it was one of the strangest experiences of my life. Who would have thought that someone would try to create an HOA out of thin air and use it to harass the person who owned 93% of the development? But it also taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and legal protection, and about how some people will go to incredible lengths to exert control over others. Most importantly, it taught me that the best communities aren't built on strict rules and enforcement, but on mutual respect and shared values. You can't legislate people into being good neighbors. You can only hope to attract people who already are. And in Pine Ridge Meadows, surrounded by friends and nature, I'd found exactly that.